What up, what up, what up, everyone that's watching? This is another episode of When Men Speak. I'm your boy, Markeith. We got your man, Preacher Man, and we got Kurt Franklin, and we have our guest for the second time, Miss Sydney Harrison and her daughter, Miracle. What's going on, peoples? How y'all doing?
Good.
Fantastic.
All right, so we're gonna continue the series part three of trauma and how it impacts our day-to-day lives. So, like real quick, I want to introduce you guys to Miracle Harrison. Say hello, Miracle.
Hello. Nice
And
to
what
meet
we're
you guys.
gonna do, she's an 18-year-old college student. She want to share her story of how her experience in trauma at a very young age, and the trauma was her losing her father to suicide. So before we actually go into that, we want to give you a little background of Miracle and how she got her name, and from her birth to her passion to the trauma aspect of things. So real quick, Miracle, tell us a little bit about your background and how you received the name Miracle.
Well, I got three heart surgeries and was able to stay alive. Basically, the doctors were able to basically perform three open heart surgeries and save me. Hence the name Miracle.
Okay. And so from that, you gained the passion to try to do what during that time
Become a
as a kid?
surgeon
Become a surgeon. And why did you have that passion to become a surgeon?
so I could help other people just how they helped me.
Okay. So give us a little more information and rev to that. You had a passion because you wanted to try to help other people surgically and help save lives just like your lives were being saved, right?
Yes.
Sid, so tell us a little bit about that situation.
um, I found out when I was 5 months pregnant that my daughter was sick, and I think I might have been maybe 22, 23 years old on my fourth pregnancy actually, and I found out that she had this heart defect that was a 1 percentile, which means not a lot of kids were born with this issue, so they didn't have a lot of research out there available, for it. So um, we had great doctors. We truly had to rely on God because we had nothing to anchor ourselves on, no real true facts about how she's going to be when she gets older. Are these surgeries like really going to help her? And it was really traumatic because I got this information while I was pregnant. So you have that. I'm already pregnant. I already got all these hormonal issues going on, and have to deal with the fact that I'm going to, when my daughter enters this life, that we're already starting it, with a bit of a hardship. So, yeah, she had her first surgery at 4 days old. Um, and the problem she had was most people have four ventricles. You have two at the top and two at the bottom. Miracle only had one ventricle at the bottom. So the blood would come in. You know how you're supposed to have like oxygenated blood goes to one part of the body and unoxygenated blood goes to the other part of the body. But for Miracle, it was mixing and she was getting oxygenated blood in places that didn't need it and unoxygenated blood in places that needed oxygen. So she would lose circulation. Her lips would be super blue, her finger and her toes. It's almost like she's internally suffocating. So when she was born, she had the blue lips, blue around her eyes, her fingertips and everything. So her first surgery was at 4 days old. They put a shunt in to direct the blood flow to her lungs so it didn't have to go through the heart. And then her other 2 surgeries, one at 3 and one and another at 5, kind of solidified that stent. And now she's doing fantastic. I mean, you don't ask her to run more than 10 minutes, but she's doing great. So I knew that moment when I found out when I was 5 months pregnant that I had to speak life into that scenario. So we decided to call her what she will be. And that was a miracle.
Okay, so you guys came up with the name prior to you giving birth.
Yeah.
Okay, and here we have it, Miracle. I'm looking for a miracle. Hey, so check this out. Okay, let's go into aspect. Okay, I think I want to talk to you. But before we kind of go to you, can you guys hear me?
What did you say?
Yeah, it glitched out for a second.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Sid, real quick, can you walk us through? What happened as far as her dad committing suicide, and can you walk us through how you ended up giving that information over to your kids? How did you deliver that?
Wow.
Can you hear?
Yeah, I hear you. Give me
Sid, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
I can hear her.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Sid.
You can hear me?
I can hear her.
Unmute. Are you on mute?
No.
No, Marquis, we can hear her. Maybe it's you. We can hear her. We can hear her.
I guess we have some technical difficulties right now. Miracle, can you hear us?
Yes.
Sid, can you go off and come back on?
It's not me.
Marquis, it's you.
It's you, brother. We can hear everything fine.
Y'all can hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you too. You're the one that can't hear. We all can hear.
The viewers can hear as well.
Yeah, he probably needs to go off back up.
Yeah.
Well, as far as I'll answer the question, so I won't, pause out the podcast. But when I found out what actually happened, the police didn't actually tell me what happened. I kind of figured out what happened because I went into my bedroom and I saw a suicide letter. And then, so on top of me having to deal with the fact that hear from the cops that he's actually passed away, I know in my mind, the cops are not telling me suicide because they can't tell me suicide yet, but I know it is because I have a letter. I don't want to tell my kids that, and we're huddled up on the floor and we're crying, and it all comes out on the news and everything. So everything, it's not like something that was a secret and we just slowly integrated that information in. It was on the nightly news, what happened and the cause of what happened. So with each kid, I kind of had to address them individually because they're so different. And one of the main things I constantly had to remind them and made sure I reminded them of is that that his death was derived from an illness, and that was mental illness, and that he's not going to go to hell, and we will see him again. And that was really prevalent for me while trying to help my kids deal with that, because we were very prominent in our faith. And and it was spoken, were little, that if you commit suicide, then you're going to hell, right? So I knew deep in my heart that is so not true, because I dealt with my husband and his mental illness, and it's not something he can control if he's not doing therapy and he's not on meds. And unfortunately, he wasn't doing his therapy and he stopped taking his meds. So it was really about me not just convincing them, but giving them a certain type of peace to know that this is a sickness just like any other disease, and that you will see your dad again, and that it's not something that they did that caused them to do that. So it was a very delicate type of cat and mouse game of like feeding them truth but loving them through their pain, like giving them the space to feel angry. I want them to have their emotions. I don't want to shove what they felt down. They need to have it, but at the same time kind of reiterate that it was never them, and that he loved them with all his heart. It was just, and the thing is, I had to walk this thing out with each of them. And I would like to say it was together, but it wasn't, because they're so different. You got Trinity that's super independent. So I had to talk to her like she's 25. I got Isaiah, who's angry and he's silent, and I got to penetrate his wall. I got Angel, who knows him, but hadn't had enough time with him to actually kind of resonate what's happening. And I have Miracle that was super, super close to him and just could not understand what was going on. And she already had a little bit of anxiety herself. So trying to fight against her own anxiety and not taking on the fact that he killed himself onto herself, so it was difficult, but God was with us the entire way, for sure.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so now, Miracle, here we go. It's your turn. Your mom tells you that your best friend, your favorite parent just committed suicide. What are you thinking, and how old are you at this time?
I was like 10 or 11.
And what?
I mean, I really didn't understand it at the time. I kind of just didn't understand mental health like that until I kind of got to like after middle school. I started to get more into like what it meant to me and what it meant to like my dad. And I started to become more passionate about that instead of like trying to be a surgeon. I sort of started to get more into trying to figure out what people need mentally.
Okay, as a 10-year-old, how were you feeling when you received this information? Were you
Wait,
able to
sorry.
were you process any of it at all? And what was it like living a life at school, in the school environment?
It was definitely difficult. I would say people at my school were definitely like fake. They were like fake nice, trying to like, because it got disclosed to my school without our permission. And so people were kind of being fake and trying to be nicer than they were before. And that was kind of hard to deal with because I kind of felt like alone in that because nobody was really genuine. And I had to like figure it out at my own pace.
Okay, so how was that? You say figure it out at your own pace. You're a very uh inquisitive and intellectual young lady. Can you hear me, Miracle? Oh man.
Having some technical difficulties
Yeah,
here.
really. So as she going through that,
I,
go ahead. Miracle.
I can hear you.
All right. Did you hear anything I said before then? Before you came back on?
Could you say that one more time?
I asked, like, you going through the process of trying to figure it out on your own. How did you figure it out? Because you're a very intelligent young lady, right? First of all, at the age of 10, you don't know what depression is. How did you even find out about what that was that your dad had caused him to commit suicide?
So I was into a lot of dark stuff, and so um, I definitely, I definitely kind of figured it out through that, like the TV shows I watched and everything like that.
Mm, okay. So you kind of
And
put two. Go ahead.
yeah, and I also read a lot. My mom could vouch. I intake a lot of dark media, and so like I kind of figured out like what depression was, and anxiety and all that after like researching that. And then I also got interested in that and took a course, an AP psychology course when I was a junior or sophomore, and that gave gain helped me gain a lot more insight.
Oh, okay. So how did his suicide make you feel though? Did you feel like it was your fault that he didn't love you? Of course you ask yourself the question, why would my dad do something like this? Because we know, or I know, because I'm close to the family. Um, because me and your dad served together in the military and we served together in church. And you guys was a very spiritual family. You know what I mean? He was a minister. You know what I mean? He had to, he could pray. He had the gift of being able to interpret the word. All these things. So, Miracle, you there?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, being that your dad was who he was, and you was his child, and he committed suicide. I mean, what kind of thoughts did you have? Were you angry? Because were you confused and not and like did you just not love us? That's why your life like what were you going through? What
Well, at first, initially, I was angry. I was just I'm angry and confused. I didn't understand why he would kind of do that to us and like leave us in that way. And then after like looking more into mental health and like really understanding why depressed like people with depression and mental health issues take their own life, I was able to understand that it wasn't really him. It was more of the mental health issue that was eating him like alive. It was like mental health was like the monster, and that situation, like eating it eats at your brain. And so like he wasn't really his own self, I feel like. And so I definitely, with that understanding, I was able to come to like not like a consensus, but I was able to come to terms with everything a lot easier, knowing what mental health was, because I could see my siblings kind of, took a bit longer for them to come to terms, because mental health is not a very talked about subject in our family or in general, and most like in our school either. And so I definitely feel like being able to look into mental health and understand what it meant, I had like gave me a bit of an upper hand and advantage to kind of coming to terms with things a bit quicker and easier.
okay. So you came to terms a little quicker and easier because I guess you did research and you began to understand what the disease was, right? But in the process
Right.
from him dying to you getting to that point of understanding, can you kind of explain how you was feeling in that time of confusion? Um,
Well, I just felt a lot more anxiety. I didn't understand what anxiety was, but I knew I felt like off, and I felt a lot like more like anger and just sadness, like a lot more emotions in general. I'm also bipolar, so I didn't know what that meant back then, but I definitely see that I was very like I fluctuated moods a lot. And I feel like these things came out of my trauma and they weren't always there. Like anxiety was there for quite a bit, but it came out of my trauma. So I was dealing with my own mental health issues after dealing with trauma. So
right.
that was just difficult to navigate.
And see, that's the thing that I want people to understand. So basically, you're saying your trauma caused anxiety, severe anxiety, and you're saying your trauma also possibly, if I'm hearing you correctly, caused you to become bipolar.
Yes.
And these are things that people not understanding, that certain things, because of humanity, because we're human, no matter how much we pray and how much we have a relationship with God, we're still human. And there are traumas that trauma causes certain things, whether it's mental imbalances, whether it's um physical trauma that causes you to use a limb, spiritual trauma that causes you to question your faith or even lose faith. That trauma itself, because we are in human form, it causes certain things to happen, and it has an effect on us one way or another, even though that effect may be different depending on the individual.
I mean, I can attest,
So
Mark. I can attest.
can you walk us through you identifying these things? How did you identify that the trauma caused anxiety? How were you feeling with anxiety? I mean, how explain your anxiety at the time? I guess you can say ask that question.
Wait, Mom, what were you gonna say?
No. Answer this question.
Oh, well, I can say that I just had a heightened amount of trauma, like not trauma, but anxiety. I hadn't had anxiety in that like intensity in a long time. I don't even think in a long time. Like, I don't think I've ever had anxiety like that. Um, and I could tell that something changed. I just didn't know exactly what it was at the time because, I was 10. I didn't know, like, although I looked into mental health issues, I still didn't have the understanding that I do now. So I definitely think that it was something that I didn't have before, and I kind of just noticed. Um, I just noticed a shift after the trauma versus before the trauma.
Okay. And then what about the bipolar diagnosis, and what caused you to what how did you find out? What led up to you finding out that you was
Well,
bipolar?
I went to a psychiatrist just because my anxiety was getting out of control and I wanted to potentially go on medication. And they had done a diagnostic just to see everything I had and medicate everything, like, all the issues that I had. And they had told me that I had bipolar disorder. And I did kind of see that prior. Um, so I kind of understood that. But it was definitely like a shocker because I've never seen that before my trauma. You know what I mean? And for me, I feel like I'm born like mental illness is I've always believed that mental illness was like something you were born with until I understood that it can come about through trauma. And so I didn't even I for a long time I really didn't like I couldn't comprehend that I had bipolar disorder even after the diagnosis because I just felt like I didn't. And I feel like I blocked that part of trauma out to understand how I actually acted. So I didn't know if I knew that it had been because of the trauma just because it was before and after, directly after, but I didn't know why, if
Mm,
that makes sense.
right. So can you tell us what bipolar is? Do you have bipolar 1 and bipolar 2?
I have bipolar type 2. It's basically you have really high like manic episodes where you're really happy, or they're hypomanic episodes and you tend to spend money a lot and you tend to make impulsive decisions. And then there's the really low depressions, which can turn into suicidal thoughts.
Okay, so what you're saying is you started to have these go through all these different phases and you didn't know what was really happening. It just started happening after you experienced trauma with your father. Come on, technology. This is getting good
Oh
now.
no,
Come on.
no, I can hear you. I can hear you.
You
I
can
just
hear?
I
Okay,
turned
okay.
it. Yeah.
Could you hear what I just asked?
Could you reiterate that one more time?
I said, so leading up to your diagnosis, you started to experience the manic and also severe depression. So you
Hmm.
started to go through the process of, you know, being suicidal and all that stuff once after you experienced trauma with your dad committing suicide.
Yes, I would say so. I hadn't really noticed those symptoms before. I hadn't really, but I just, I sometimes I have this fear that maybe I did have these symptoms before. I just never noticed it because I wasn't as into mental health as I am now. And I don't
Hmm.
know if I can remember those times. But from what I
Hmm.
can remember, I don't think I had those symptoms prior.
Sid, you was about to say something?
Yeah, with Miracle, we always knew it was a level of anxiety. I mean, there were times I had to talk her off the wall. I mean, and I'm at work and she's just walking home from work, you know, and I had to talk her down. But it wasn't until we both agreed that we need to do you need to get with a therapist. You
Wait,
need
so one second. This was after she experienced the trauma, right? She started
to,
having it.
right. So
Okay.
she's having these bouts of anxiety to the point where it's giving me anxiety. Because I don't know. Now I'm like, I'm scared to leave her at home. I need to, now it's like something has to happen. We have to do something because this is not my normal. And this being created because as a parent, I want to protect her, and so we had decided that therapy is a must. And it was then that she started to recognize, really see what she was feeling, how she was reacting, and bringing a name to it.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that's big. Fellas, do y'all have anything real quick before we move to the next question for Miracle? Go ahead, Chance.
Yeah, we got some stuff, man. You done took over.
I know.
What's up?
So Miracle. Wow. So I'll start with this. Where was the church in all of this, especially after the traumatic event? What was the position of the church, and what was the impact that they had on you and the family after the passing of your father?
They helped out around the house and gave us food, but it was definitely not, they weren't there like emotionally. We kind of had to go to group which of course, like, I wouldn't think that they're like my therapist, but they weren't even there like past like artificial pity, I guess.
Mm.
It felt like it was just like pity and artificial, like just artificial. It was very artificial. And so you could kind of tell just that they associated my dad with my family, because it's like every time they looked at us, it was like they saw my dad. And so because he died, like passed away, it was very much like they looked at us in pity instead of looking at us for like who we actually were as people.
Right, and I'm asking this for the audience benefit, and I want you to talk about, as we discussed yesterday. I want you to talk about um, what you needed from the church at that time that you were going through this, and what they provided, and what you needed in that season of your life.
Right. I definitely needed a companion and someone to understand my situation and not just judge me and my family for the actual situation and judge the scenario. It was very much they looked at our trauma and not us as people and as our growth, even because we were growing even outside of the trauma and outside of the sadness. We were still doing our own thing, and it was months and months, and people were still looking at us as if they pitied us. And it was just like I felt like we needed people to ask those like different questions, not how are you, how have you been doing, more of what have you been up to, anything new, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. And so you mentioned prior to this happening, your desire from birth, and how you got your name, that you were pursuing. You wanted to pursue the path of a surgeon. Now, what changed, if anything, after this happened, as far as your career path or your purpose in life?
I definitely felt more inclined to sort of pursue mental health, because I felt like I felt a sort of obligation rather than a passion to pursue heart surgery. Just because I got sort of, I guess, saved by my doctor. I felt like I needed to save other people, but I felt like that wasn't really a calling. I felt like that was just what I thought I needed to do, whereas mental health and being like a therapist felt more of like a calling. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Understood. What you got, Gabe?
Sydney and Miracle, really, really grateful for you guys taking the time to kind of share your story, especially Miracle, like what I, during our discussion yesterday, I give to you. But I'll start with Sydney. Was your husband depression caused from military service? And that was one question I meant to ask. I didn't ask yesterday.
It didn't start with military. It finished with military.
Okay, so you had prior.
Right. So he had some, you know how you don't want to throw people under the bus when you,
Yeah.
He had some family issues.
Mm-hmm.
Deep core, mess with your whole identity type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't deal with that as a young teenager. You go straight into the military and all they tell you is to suck it up and drive on.
Mm-hmm.
You got friends that die, suck it up and drive on.
Mm-hmm.
And when you haven't even dealt to the basic core of your trauma, and then you just keep adding more trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, I think he lost the capacity to find a way out. Because nobody talked about, he only talked to me about that. And I mean, he may have talked to, maybe he had another confidant about it. I don't know. But it's not too many people that he let loose the things that he told me. So that understanding alone has not allowed my anger toward him to like take over my life, because I understand when you that hurt and you don't deal with that type of hurt, you're bound to do anything. So I think I think it started in his young life that created this person, and while he was in the military, this created person from his trauma created more issues, threats, and decisions that he made that then caused him to feel bad about himself, feel like he's less than worthy, feel like he's a horrible person, because he just kept, he was in like this little hamster wheel. He would just do the same thing over and over and over again, and then feel bad about it, and then feel good for a second, and then he'll be good, and then he'll do the same thing over again. And then a person that loves him, I'm still being affected by his decisions.
Right.
So it's hurting me as an individual. But and that's one of the things I'm healing from in all of this, is that though he was struggling with his own trauma, he was creating trauma in my own life.
Right.
So it's like this push and pull. When you don't just deal with the issues, it just it doesn't just hurt you, it hurts everybody that you're in contact with.
Yeah.
And I'm coming out of that space and time, and thank you, Lord. But it really, it took me a long while to realize that I had not only my own childhood trauma, but I have trauma within my own marriage that affected me. So, and the trauma of him dying, and raising children by myself, and taking on all of life by myself, and not having that support system that I wish I could have had, or that I perceived I should have. I'm not going to make it everybody's fault. Sometimes we play that victim role to justify being in the spaces that we are in. Um, so yeah, it was just the military. It was life, and it's the lack of dealing with what happens when life happens.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you were speaking, I felt like God wanted me to ask that question for a purpose, because the first show I talk about my family hurt and the pain that I went through that led me to be suicidal. I've been hurt so badly by my family, and it all came to a head after my marriage in 2017. And I was suicidal, and I went to the VA center in Arlington, and the dude was not willing to help me. But thanks be to God, there was group. And that's why I think, Sydney, we talk about the church that I go to, Grace Covenant, had a men's group. And God used those brothers to help me unpack some of my trauma from family hurt, compounded on with PTSD from the military. So that's one thing I want to clear. Like, beyond church, churches should really invest in some kind of group system. And I think Miracle mentioned it, because these people will walk with you prior to your trauma, so they'll understand you. So that fake sympathy that Miracle kept saying, you will know these brothers and sisters have been there before your trauma. So I know that's something that God used to help me, because I was at that point. And something quickened my spirit to go to that men's group. And the funny thing was, I love wearing lapel. My lapel pin flag was upside down, and most of them are former military, and that's a sign of trauma. And the first day I walk into the men's group, the brother, former Marine, he looked at me, he's like, "Are you in distress?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am in distress." You know, and but yeah, group really help beyond the church, because these will be people that help you. And the last thing I have for Miracle, what is your fondest memory with your father that you go back to as you unpack all of these?
Probably either going to Hershey Park with him and riding my first roller coaster, or him having me try mussels for the first time, paying me back by getting me something from Five and Below.
That's pretty sweet. So do you use that memory, or did you use those memories, that fond memory, as you were dealing with your trauma, with his suicide, to kind of help to cope with your pain?
I did, but I kind of sort of used just any memory in general that I could grab, because I felt like my memories would stay. So I would just grasp onto anything good.
And then the last thing I had, you mentioned a youth pastor prior to your dad passing said that people that commit suicide go into hell. How did that affect you?
It definitely made me feel like super anxious about what would happen after I passed away, if I would be able to see my dad ever again. But then my mom, family reassured me that that's not true, and I definitely felt a lot more like comfortable in that, knowing that I could be able to see him in the afterlife.
Yeah, and we, as your father was a follower of Christ, once he made that decision, I just wanted to kind of reinforce that you don't lose your salvation. I think Markeith said it, Chancey said it, Cindy said it yourself. Illness and sin don't cause us to lose our salvation. Jesus put it this way: whoever God put in his hand, no one can take out. So you will see your father again. And that's it.
So, Markeith.
Yes, sir.
Before you jump in, but it's 7:41, so we got about 20 minutes, and I know we have some questions to address. But Miracle, before we jump further, I would like to ask you. It's been a few years now, and you've come through some tough times. what is your process now to maintain your sanity, and how do you what kind of measures do you have in place to stay sane and to keep pushing after the fact?
Right. I definitely think that understanding that Black mental health is a completely different breed of mental health, and understanding that we have to take care of ourselves in a way that white people or just other races don't. And that's okay. And that's completely okay, because other um races may deal with trauma differently, but it's just a different beast. And so it's important for me to understand the best way to take care of myself that is strictly best for my mental health as a Black woman. And I think that's definitely been helping me, just being able to advocate for Black mental health and understand what we need and understand what trauma comes from. For us, really helps me feel motivated to keep going, knowing that I can help other people, especially Black people, because Black people have, it's been a rampant um, call for help when it comes to mental health in the Black community. It's very much not looked at. It's very much underemphasized. So I definitely want to be a voice to Black mental health, to help people know that it is okay to seek for help and everything like that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. I certainly appreciate it. I'm so encouraged, excited, motivated. Just so many things are going through my body right now, and I'm so glad for all of those who tuned in, because this is such a dynamic issue in the Black community that we don't deal with very well at all. And matter of fact, when I was coming up, it was shunned to even talk about it or to mention it. So I think we all know at this point in the game that it is an issue, especially in our community. And I just thank God for this platform. We can address things like this, and even the more to try to give people some kind of hope and help and the resources to deal with these things. Markeith, on you, brother.
I don't have much to say, bro. If you don't mind, just let's go into reading some of the questions.
Okay.
And I'll let you take control of that answer.
Okay. Nicole says, I don't know if I remember you saying, but do you think you'll continue counseling or therapy for a lifetime, just to be on the safe side for the sake of protecting your mental health? And that question is for you, Miracle.
I do think I will continue counseling and therapy for a lifetime, because I feel like it's something I'm really passionate about, and I feel like I know measures in which to take care of my own mental health and ways to. I was actually told yesterday it's important to pour back into yourself after, like, getting sort of leaked out of, from people's trauma and people's hurt and pain. And I think that as long as I take the necessary measures to make sure that I'm staying healthy mentally, I feel like it'll definitely be a passion worth the long while.
Amen. Agreed. Next question. If you experience suicidal thoughts, how do you process those low moments? And I would pose this to you and your mom.
For me, it's tough for me to process. Honestly, I don't really know how to process it to this day. I sort of just cry, and it's okay to cry and let those emotions out in that way. That's probably one of the most healthy ways to let out an emotion, instead of doing other things like harming yourself or others. And so I tend to just cry, because it's hard to understand those complex thoughts of suicide. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What about you, Sid?
Miracle, you also call your support system. You would text me
Yes,
in a
of
heart.
course.
You would text me
Yeah,
in a
I
heartbeat.
talk to. I make sure to surround myself by people who will support me in those low moments, and I think it's important for people to have support systems so that you don't feel alone in those moments.
Yeah. For me, I had a really bad bout of thoughts of suicide last November. It was really bad, and I realized it was getting out of control. My main issue was that the reason why I was able to keep my composure throughout my life up until this moment was because of my kids. And I'm becoming an empty nester. And so the fear was that when I'm in this home alone and I don't have systems set in place for my well-being, I don't know what I'm going to do. So when I literally woke up in the middle of the night saying, I got to do something about this. I can't keep going through these patterns of I'm okay and then I'm not okay. And January 1, I got a therapist, and I've been going to her faithfully every week, being very honest and true. And a lot of it is about having the wrong perspective, and learning how to change the perspective, changing the narrative, because we feed ourselves this narrative that our emotions guide us in. But that's not a true narrative. That's what our emotions are leading us in. And so we have to get these tools to kind of like if you're going through an anxiety attack, you take a bag and you breathe in it so you get your mind to slow down. It's the same scenario. You got to, when I feel that negative, I have to bounce it with a positive. So every single time I say, I'm a lonely, but no, I got 4 beautiful kids that's doing fantastic. I wish I was rich, but no, I haven't worried about rent since my husband passed away. It's like this thing where you have to constantly combat that negative connotation with something positive and true. And there's a reality, because a negative normally is not the reality. It's something that's pulling you down. And I hate to say it's the devil, but a lot of times it is. But it's also the state of our trauma is so heightened. We live in that bad place because our brain shuts down and the trauma becomes alive. To the point where it were times where I will wake up and feel the same exact way I felt the moment that I found out Terrence died. Like it was like not 7 years had passed. It would be, I woke up and it's the same exact emotion as I had that moment I found out. And I had to figure out a way to not allow that emotion to control me. Like, I'm stronger than this, and then you go back and I say, I have 4 kids. I've done this thing. I am not going to let my emotions be the thing that take me out, So it's just making that decision that you care enough about yourself, enough about your family members to get help. You're not weak because you get a therapist. It actually means you're strong enough to say, I need help in this area. And when I realized that, it's been opening up floodgates. Like I can have these honest conversations, and then she can help derail my thought process, the bad thought processes, and then give me tools to, like, when I get in those moments, that I have these tools in my bag that I can pull on instead of allowing my emotions to get out of the way, run crazy and rampant. But I mean, I can thank the Lord to say that I haven't had that. I had a moment like that since November of 2022, but that's a work in progress. That's nothing to say that I'm never going to have that again. It's that I'm vigilantly working on my reaction to life. Like, and that's the thing. Do I react in a trauma-driven way, or do I react in a perspective this is life. Life is not against me. This is just life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, both of you. And we got so many questions, but I want to hit something that you said, Sid, and it's about balance. And I know our church folk, might not agree with this, but we need balance in our lives. And what I mean is, you have to have, a church life. That's important. For sake not dissembling of ourselves together, but you need a therapist in your life. You need a support system. You need a balance of things in your life. And what my point is this, what's your plan? Because life will happen, as you just heard Miss Miracle and Sid, explain to us. And sometimes it just don't feel fair. But what is your plan? I remember I was at the 10-year mark in my military career, and I was thinking about quitting and getting out of the military and going back home. And I called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm getting out. I'm tired of this military life. It's not for me. I'm getting out. My mom asked me one question. She said, Chancey, she said, what's your plan? And I got silent. I didn't have an answer. And my mom told me right then, she said, son, that's your answer. You stay your butt right there in the military until you can answer that question. And I ended up doing 24 years and retired, and life is good. But I didn't have a plan. And what I mean to say to you is this: have a plan, because life will happen. Trauma in some shape or form will happen. What is your plan when it does? And if you don't have one, that's how those suicidal thoughts come. That's how people do those things that they do. That's how we run down that rabbit hole of confusion and despair and depression, because we don't have a plan. Support system, therapists, church, prayer, worship, all of that got to be part of the plan. Okay, next question. What word of advice would you, Miracle, or Sid give to someone who has experienced a traumatic event? What word of advice would you give to our listeners?
I would say definitely seek help from people that love you and from therapists. Utilize tools around you, because a lot of times we tend to be afraid to go to therapy, even though it's a very useful tool. And I think that it should be utilized as much as possible, because it's professionals that know exactly how to help you with your trauma.
I would say, do not isolate. Do not isolate. Run to support. It's in our isolation that our thoughts run rampant and take control. So if you can at all possible, don't be afraid to reach out even to that one person. Do not isolate yourself in your most vulnerable points of your life, because it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea. So you always want somebody, a voice of reason on the other side of your ear, giving you some words of wisdom and strength and love. Do not isolate.
That's right. That's right. Nicole, she answered this question. She was initially considering being a surgeon, and then after this happened, she changed her major to start pursuing psychology and being a therapist after the fact. So yes, to answer your question, it did change her direction in life after the event happened. And did the school offer counseling for you, Miracle? Even though you were so young, did they offer any counseling to you?
They did. It was offered, but it was not that helpful. I'd say like a regular therapist was more helpful than the school counselor.
Yeah, I agree, and that goes back to what I was saying, guys, about balance. The reason why you want to have therapists and the church, because therapists are giving it to you from a medical, psychological. They've studied this stuff. They studied the brain and how it operates and how it functions after a traumatic event. So that kind of information the church may not have. So that's why it's important for us to have the balance of church and secular professions. Absolutely, Matthew, such a courageous young lady. Thank you again, Miracle and Sydney, for joining us this evening. And either of you can answer this. How would you identify trauma now that you've experienced this event in your life?
Ooh,
definitely definitely triggers that trigger a certain, I would associate it sort of with PTSD, something that triggers you in a way that brings you back to a moment.
That's good. That's good, Miracle.
That's really
I think
good.
that's trauma.
And something that pulls you away from society, people. You know, where you don't feel like you belong any place. You put yourself in space, even when people try to get into your. There's something traumatic that's happening. A brick wall around you that you're trying to protect yourself everybody and everything.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. You know, most of we're all military guys, so we've all experienced trauma in some. I know I have from some very deep ways, and that's exactly how I would define it as well. When you see things on the news, that's why I hate watching the news, and you see real bad accidents. You know, you hear about all these crazy murders and things like that, and sometimes some of that stuff takes you back to those events that you've witnessed or you've experienced or that you've been exposed to. So I go back to what's your plan, and there's that support system, and there's those resources and those tools that the counselors and the therapists have given you to put in your toolkit that you can pull on. There's those scriptures that you quote to yourself and you continue to say out loud to yourself to kind of get you out of that funk and that place that you are, so that you don't go down that rabbit hole of despair. But there's so many things that we can pull on now that we've had this experience that we have to utilize almost on a day-to-day basis to stay out of that place. I can really attest to what you're saying. Any other questions?
Chancey, let me say something to Miracle. Yeah, Miracle, I told you yesterday, and I just want to state it again, just based on your experiences and how mature, intelligent you are and your passion for helping people, God would use you mightily to help people unpack their trauma. You know, it's nothing like a psychiatrist that have been through the fire. You know, in scripture they say, I've been through the fire, but I'm not burned. And God will give you his wisdom to help people unpack. Speaking with you yesterday, you and your mom, every time you help me unpack some things that I wonder. Like, for example, yesterday I told you with the issue of African Americans being not immune to counseling. And you talk about generational trauma that make us kind of in tune to push away trauma. And, you know, so that's just a tidbit. So I just want to say that again, that God will use you mightily to help people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for letting me be featured in this. I really appreciate it.
And Miracle, she was the one that was like, Mom, you need to go to counseling. Mom, you need to make it happen. Here's the people that you need to talk to. You know, she was really pushing. She's really adamant about making that decision. And she's doing it herself. She's in counseling herself. You know, she's not saying things. She's literally actively working on her own mental health while in the same breath gaining the education to help others in her mental health, with their mental health. So, you know, I commend her. I count her a blessing in my own family to help us be able to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I applaud you. I applaud you, Miracle, for doing. The only person I've met in my life other than Miracle that loves counseling is my wife. She, from the day I met her, she's like counseling. So it's true. I think in our community, we need to push, like Chancey said, you can, you know, we all are followers of God. We believe, have a relationship with him, but God created all these resources. And I think that's where church people sometimes miss. Just like when you get sick, you need a surgeon. That's the same way how when you're sick mentally, you need a psychiatrist to help you unpack those things. So we shouldn't be confrontational to counseling.